Have you ever stopped to consider what happens when an entire generation of men reaches a breaking point in how they view relationships with women, deciding collectively that the cost far outweigh any potential benefits and choosing instead to step away permanently from dating and marriage altogether? The reality we are facing today is that countless men have come to the firm conclusion that engaging in modern relationships has become more of a burden than a source of fulfillment, leading them to embrace solitude as a path to genuine peace and self reliance. This shift is not some fleeting trend, but a profound response to decades of changing dynamics. And if you stay with me through this discussion, you will understand exactly why so many men are declaring that the damage has been done and they have no intention of ever returning to the way things were. If you appreciate this kind of straightforward, angry guy content that dives deep into the realities men are navigating today, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with others who need to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell, then select all so you get every single video the moment we release it. Also, if you are serious about protecting and safeguarding your assets while learning how to grow your wealth in the crypto space, check out Angry's Crypto Academy, where you can master how to buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrency effectively. And the link to the Academy is right there in the description of this video. So go ahead and check it out now. And if you are really enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description because that kind of energy keeps these discussions coming strong. For many years, men were consistently told through various cultural messages that they were the ones who needed to change, that they had to contribute more, communicate better, and essentially shoulder the majority of the responsibility for making relationships work, all while receiving little acknowledgement for their efforts. This narrative placed women on a pedestal, portraying them as inherently superior, or at the very least more deserving, of understanding and accommodation without always providing substantial reasons grounded in fairness or equality. Men internalize this to some degree, often bending over backward to meet expectations that kept shifting. But over time, that constant pressure led to a growing sense of fatigue and disillusionment. Today, many men have awakened to the realization that they are not solely responsible for the challenges in relationships, that true partnerships require equal compromise from both sides, and that endlessly trying to please someone who may not reciprocate in kind is not sustainable in the long run. Consider how arguments between men and women often play out in ways that leave men feeling particularly drained. Men tend to approach disagreements with logic and facts, seeking resolution through clear reasoning and evidence, whereas women frequently navigate these situations through emotions and feelings, which can make it impossible for the man to ever truly prevail in the discussion. When a man presents factual points against emotional responses, the exchange rarely leads to mutual understanding. Instead, it often escalates until the woman feels validated in her emotions, sometimes even energized by the release of stress through tears or heightened expression, while the man walks away feeling humiliated, exhausted, and defeated. Women have a different relationship with emotional release, finding relief in crying or expressing feelings openly, whereas men typically reserve such displays for moments of profound distress and generally dislike the vulnerability it brings. This mismatch creates a dynamic where women can emerge from conflicts feeling refreshed, but men are left carrying the weight of unresolved tension and self doubt. Over years of experiencing this pattern repeatedly, men have grown weary of engaging in debates they can never win on fair terms, leading them to question why they should continue investing energy into interactions that consistently leave them depleted. This exhaustion extends beyond individual arguments into the broader experience of coexisting with women in romantic contexts. Men report that simply interacting on a daily basis, whether through dating or long term relationships, has begun to feel like a form of ongoing strain, where they must constantly monitor their words, actions, and even presence to avoid misunderstandings or accusations. Society has amplified this through decades of messaging that positioned men as the default problem in gender dynamics, encouraging them to self reflect endlessly while often excusing or minimizing similar accountability on the other side. Men were taught to worship women as the fairer sex, to prioritize their happiness above their own, and to view any shortcomings in relationships as primarily their fault. But without balanced reciprocity, this approach eroded men's sense of self worth and led many to conclude that giving their value to people or systems that do not genuinely appreciate or protect it is no longer worth the cost. Instead, a growing number of men have chosen to walk away entirely, discovering a profound peace in their own company, free from the expectations and criticisms that dominated their previous attempts at connection. Women, in turn, are now facing significant challenges in navigating life without the traditional support structures that men once provided willingly. As economic pressures mount with inflation and societal shifts, many women find themselves struggling more than anticipated during their independent phases, having traded direct partnerships with men for reliance on broader institutional provisions that are proving unreliable. Yet, when these supports falter, there is a noticeable desire among some women to re engage men for stability, family building, or companionship, particularly after periods focused on career ambitions or personal exploration that did not yield the expected long term satisfaction. However, men who have already found contentment in solitude are not inclined to reverse course, having learned through hard experience that returning would mean reopening themselves to the same dynamics that prompted their departure in the first place. This refusal is not born from pettiness, but from a hard earned recognition that peace is preferable to repeating cycles of frustration and sacrifice without meaningful return. Over the past several decades, women have actively reshaped many shared public spaces in ways that made men feel increasingly unwelcome or scrutinized through movements and campaigns that highlighted real issues but sometimes extended into broader criticisms of male behavior. Men were discouraged from occupying spaces like workplaces, social venues, or even casual environments without fear of judgment. Complaints about everyday actions combined with heightened awareness campaigns contributed to an atmosphere where men began minimizing their presence to avoid potential conflict or misinterpretation. Rather than fighting back or becoming resentful in overt ways, most men responded quietly by withdrawing, leaving those spaces to women, and retreating to private pursuits where they could experience freedom and tranquility. Now, as consequences of that withdrawal become apparent in declining birth rates, economic imbalances, and social isolation for many women, there are calls for men to return and help restore balance, but those calls largely go unanswered because men have already adapted to a life that feels safer and more fulfilling without the complications. One of the most profound changes for many men is a diminished desire for physical intimacy itself, as sex has been reframed in their minds from a joyful aspect of connection to a potential liability carrying significant risks. When intimacy is withheld as leverage, tied to expectations that feel manipulative, or surrounded by concerns about consent interpretations and legal ramifications, it loses its appeal for rational men assessing costs and benefits. Men who once viewed relationships as pathways to companionship and family now see them as minefields where a single misstep could lead to devastating personal or financial consequences. This perspective shift has led some men to conclude that even casual encounters are not worth pursuing, preferring instead the control and security of their independent lives. Women may continue seeking validation or partnership, but without men willing to engage on previous terms, the landscape has altered irreversibly. In popular discourse recently, a hypothetical scenario gained traction where many women expressed preference for encountering a bear in the woods over an unknown man, implying deep distrust toward men as a group. Men have taken note of this sentiment and responded by encouraging women to rely on that metaphorical bear for protection and provision, stepping aside completely rather than attempting to prove their harmlessness or value. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. This reaction underscores a broader exhaustion with efforts to reassure or rescue when those efforts are met with suspicion or ingratitude. Men are no longer positioning themselves as default saviors, recognizing that such roles were often exploited or unappreciated, and instead prioritizing their own well being in a society that has made traditional male contributions feel obligatory yet undervalued. For the minority of men who still harbor interest in forming lasting relationships, the search has increasingly turned overseas to regions where cultural values emphasize femininity, agreeableness, and family orientation. Countries in Asia, South America, or Eastern Europe offer women raised with different expectations around partnership, often prioritizing cooperation and mutual respect over confrontation or independence at all costs. These men report finding connections that feel balanced and rewarding, free from the adversarial elements prevalent in Western dating culture. Back home, however, trust between men and women has eroded to such an extent that rebuilding meaningful relationships on a large scale seems unlikely within our lifetimes. The foundations of mutual respect and shared goals have been damaged too deeply, leaving both sides navigating separate paths with little overlap. This permanent divergence represents the culmination of years where men absorbed criticism after criticism, adjusted repeatedly to new standards, and ultimately reached their limits. They have stopped listening to rhetoric that demands more from them while offering less in return, ceased trying to please a society that often vilified their natural traits, and embraced solitude as a viable and even preferable alternative. Women dancing in the metaphorical ashes of scorched relational landscapes, wondering why men remain distant, overlook the cumulative impact of actions that pushed men away incrementally over time. Winter has indeed arrived in the sense that consequences are now manifesting fully, and men are content observing from afar rather than intervening once more. As we reflect on these developments, it becomes evident that men walking away is not an act of defeat, but one of empowerment and choosing self preservation over participation in systems that no longer serve them equitably. The peace found in solitude allows men to focus on personal growth, hobbies, friendships with other men, and pursuits that bring genuine satisfaction without external drama. Economic hardships may intensify for those who relied heavily on indirect provisions, but men who have adapted early are insulated by their independence and resourcefulness. Storytelling from men's perspectives reveals patterns of sacrifice met with entitlement, efforts dismissed as insufficient, and loyalty rewarded with conditional affection, all contributing to the collective decision to disengage. Rhetorically, one must ask whether society truly benefits from dynamics that alienate half its population from meaningful participation in family and community building. When men opt out en masse, the ripple effects touch everything from demographics to economics. Yet the response cannot be to demand their return without addressing root causes. Men have demonstrated through their actions that they possess the agency to redefine their roles outside traditional expectations, and many find this redefinition liberating. The narrative of men as perpetual providers or fixers has been challenged successfully by their quiet exodus, proving that peace is attainable without compromise on core principles. Expanding on this, consider the psychological toll of decades spent internalizing messages of inherent male flaw. Men were encouraged to view themselves as toxic unless constantly reformed, to suppress instincts deemed problematic, and to elevate women's perspectives above their own in most conflicts. This conditioning created generations of men questioning their worth, second guessing interactions, and expending emotional energy on validation seeking that rarely satisfied. Awakening from this involves recognizing the imbalance, forgiving oneself for past accommodations, and redirecting energy inward towards self improvement and contentment. Solitude emerges not as loneliness, but as sanctuary, where men rebuild confidence unmarred by external judgment, and women navigating current realities often express surprise at men's firm stances, perhaps underestimating how deeply the frustrations accumulated. Calls for men to re engage for children's sake or societal stability ring hollow when trust remains absent. Men prioritize rationality in assessing risks, concluding that importing family models from abroad or foregoing them entirely yields better outcomes than gambling on domestic changes that may never materialize. This calculated approach reflects maturity born from experience rather than bitterness. Picture a young man entering adulthood in the late 20th or early 21st century, full of optimism about building a life that includes love, family, and partnership, raised on stories of commitment and mutual support as the foundation of a good life. He is taught from early on that providing, protecting, and cherishing a woman is part of what makes him a man, that finding the right partner and working hard together will lead to shared happiness and legacy. Yet, as he steps into the dating world, he quickly encounters a landscape where the rules seem to have changed without clear announcement, where his natural expressions of interest or affection are sometimes met with suspicion, where offering to pay for dinner or hold a door can be interpreted as outdated or controlling rather than courteous. He adjusts, learns the new etiquette, listens to advice about being more emotionally available, and tries to communicate in ways that show vulnerability, believing that adaptation will bridge any gaps and earn appreciation. As years pass and relationships form and dissolve, patterns begin to emerge that chip away at his initial enthusiasm. Patterns where his efforts to plan dates, remember important details, or surprise his partner with thoughtful gestures are noticed only when absent, but taken for granted when present. He notices that conflicts rarely resolve through calm discussion of facts and compromises, but instead spiral into emotional escalations where raising his voice even slightly makes him the aggressor, while similar intensity from her is framed as passionate self expression. He learns to apologize first, even when he feels he has done nothing wrong, because keeping the peace seems more important than being right. And he tells himself that this is what mature love requires, swallowing frustration in exchange for harmony. Over time, these small concessions accumulate into a heavier load, where he finds himself constantly scanning for potential missteps, editing his humor to avoid offense, and suppressing opinions that might spark disagreement, all while wondering if this self censorship is truly building closeness or merely delaying inevitable resentment. Fast forward through multiple relationships or one long marriage, and the same man begins to see that the goalposts keep moving, that no matter how much he evolves or how many books on relationships he reads, there is always another area where he falls short, according to critiques from partners, media, or social circles. He hears repeatedly that men as a group need to do better, that systemic issues trace back to male behavior, and he internalizes enough of this to embark on genuine self improvement, therapy, journaling, fitness, career advancement, all in service of becoming the best version of himself for the relationship. Yet when challenges arise, whether financial stress or differing life goals, the narrative often reverts to his inadequacies rather than shared responsibility, leaving him feeling that his growth is acknowledged only superficially while the core dynamic remains unbalanced. Friends share similar stories over drinks, nodding in recognition at tales of walking on eggshells, of celebrations forgotten while minor oversights are magnified, of intimacy becoming transactional rather than spontaneous. And slowly a quiet doubt forms. Is this truly partnership, or is it something closer to perpetual probation? Now, layer on the broader cultural messages that reinforce this experience, messages from films, television, advertisements, and social platforms portraying men as bumbling, emotionally stunted, or potentially dangerous unless carefully reformed by female insight. Comedy routines built on mocking male habits, news segments highlighting negative male actions as representative, educational programs teaching boys to examine their privilege while offering less parallel introspection for girls, all contribute to an environment where men feel their gender itself is under constant probation. Workplace policies evolve to address real past injustices, but sometimes swing into territories where normal male interaction is viewed through lenses of risk, requiring training on boundaries that can make casual conversation feel fraught. Public campaigns raise awareness about important issues, but occasionally broaden into sweeping statements about male behavior that leave little room for nuance, making men feel painted with the same brush regardless of individual character. Through all this, the man continues trying, believing that if he just works harder at understanding, empathizing, and accommodating, the relationship will flourish and society will eventually balance out. But biology and psychology do not bend indefinitely, and exhaustion sets in as a natural response to prolonged one sided effort. Men discover online communities where thousands voice identical frustrations, realizing they are not alone in feeling drained by dynamics they once accepted as normal. They read accounts from divorced fathers navigating family courts that seem tilted against them, from single men ghosted after investing months in courtship, from married men contemplating exit despite loving their children because staying feels like slow erosion of self. These stories resonate deeply, providing validation that the issue is not personal failure, but systemic mismatch, that trying harder within the current framework yields diminishing returns. Rhetorically, one might ask, how many times can a person apologize for existing as they are, adapt to ever shifting expectations, and sacrifice core needs before concluding that the game itself is rigged against fair play? For millions, the answer arrived in the form of quiet withdrawal, not dramatic declarations, but simple choices to stop pursuing, stop investing, stop exposing themselves to repeated disappointment. This withdrawal manifests in practical ways that reshape daily life and long term planning for men who embrace it. Dating apps are deleted not out of bitterness, but relief, freeing evenings once spent crafting messages and planning outings for hobbies, reading, exercise, or time with male friends who offer straightforward camaraderie without hidden tests. Financial resources previously directed toward impressing potential partners or maintaining relationships redirect toward investments, travel, skill building, or simply enjoying life unencumbered. The mental bandwidth, once occupied by analyzing texts, anticipating moods, or preparing for potential arguments, becomes available for creative pursuits, entrepreneurial ideas, or spiritual exploration. Men report sleeping better, feeling calmer, and experiencing joy in simple things again, describing solitude not as empty, but as spacious, room to breathe after years of constriction. This piece proves addictive in the best sense, reinforcing the decision to protect it fiercely against anything threatening to disrupt it. Meanwhile, women navigating the aftermath often express confusion or frustration at the absence of male engagement they once could rely upon, wondering why high quality men seem scarcer or less approachable than before. Some attribute it to economic factors or technology, overlooking the cumulative impact of cultural shifts that made pursuit feel hazardous for men. Career focused women in their 30s and 40s voice concerns about biological clocks and desire for family, realizing that the independence celebrated in youth comes with trade offs not fully anticipated. Social venues, once vibrant with mixed interaction, now skew heavily female or empty in certain hours as men opt for private gatherings or solo activities that pose no risk of misinterpretation. Economic data begins reflecting these choices in declining marriage rates, falling birth rates, and shifting consumer patterns where male spending prioritizes personal development over couple oriented purchases. Yet, the men who stepped away remain unmoved by these indicators, having calculated that their individual well being outweighs societal pressure to resume roles that proved detrimental. Consider the rhetorical power of the bear analogy that circulated widely, where women hypothetically chose encountering a wild bear over an unknown man in isolated woods, signaling profound distrust toward men as a category. Men absorbed this message clearly, recognizing it as confirmation that efforts to demonstrate safety or goodwill en masse would likely prove futile. Rather than protest or attempt persuasion, the common response became acceptance. If women prefer the bear's company, then let the bear provide protection, resources, and companionship. This hands off stance extends logically to broader calls for male intervention in societal issues framed as gender conflicts, where men increasingly decline to engage, preferring observation over participation in debates perceived as unwinnable. The energy once expended on defending masculinity or proving worth channels instead into building lives of quiet competence and contentment. Storytelling from the male perspective reveals heroes who are not conquerors, but survivors. Men who endured years of adaptation only to emerge stronger through release. They speak of hitting rock bottom emotionally, in relationships that demanded everything while returning little, of moments waking up, realizing they no longer recognize their own reflections after years of molding themselves to fit external molds. Recovery involves rediscovering authentic interests suppressed for compatibility, rebuilding male friendships strained by couple centric schedules, and reclaiming time wasted on fruitless pursuit. These narratives spread through podcasts, forums, and private conversations, inspiring younger men to establish boundaries earlier and prioritize self respect over societal approval. The movement grows not through confrontation, but example, men living well as the ultimate argument for their choices. Rhetorically, society faces a pivotal question. Can systems built on extracting maximum effort from one group while offering conditional acceptance sustain themselves indefinitely when that group discovers viable alternatives? History suggests not, as voluntary participation requires perceived fairness. And when fairness erodes, withdrawal follows naturally. Men walking away represent not destruction, but reallocation of resources toward paths offering better returns on investment, measured in peace rather than drama, clarity rather than confusion, autonomy rather than obligation. Women left navigating consequences may eventually recognize that demanding rescue without addressing underlying causes rarely succeeds. That partnership requires mutual incentive rather than entitlement. Expanding this exploration, consider how economic independence for men amplifies their ability to sustain solitude comfortably in modern times. Remote work, investment opportunities, and lower personal overhead without family obligations allow many to thrive financially while keeping lifestyles simple yet fulfilling. Gyms filled with focused men training alone, coffee shops where individuals read or work undisturbed, trails hiked solo with podcasts for company, all paint pictures of lives rich in personal meaning without requiring romantic validation. Travel becomes exploration rather than couple escapades. Meals become experiments in cooking or discovery of new cuisines solo. Evenings fill with books, films, or creative projects uncompromised by differing tastes. This self contained existence proves surprisingly resilient against loneliness as men cultivate inner resources that external relationships once filled inadequately. Younger generations observe these examples and adjust expectations accordingly, entering adulthood wary of repeating elders' mistakes. They witness fathers drained by divorce settlements, uncles avoiding commitment after heartbreak, older brothers content in bachelorhood, and conclude that traditional paths carry risks outweighing rewards in current climates. Education emphasizes career and financial literacy over relationship skills for many young men, reflecting shifted priorities where building wealth and health takes precedence over seeking partnership. Dating becomes occasional rather than central, viewed as potential bonus rather than life requirement, reducing pressure and paradoxically increasing confidence when interactions do occur. This generational transmission solidifies the shift, making return to previous norms increasingly improbable. Imagine the moment when a man, after years of cycling through hope and disappointment in relationships, finally allows himself to entertain the possibility that he does not need a romantic partner to live a complete and meaningful life, that the narrative he absorbed since childhood about pairing up as the ultimate goal might not apply universally in the modern context. This realization often arrives not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet settling in after months or years of observing his own patterns, reading accounts from others who have walked away, and noticing how much lighter he feels during extended periods without dating drama. He begins testing the waters of extended solitude deliberately, perhaps taking a full year off from apps and pursuits, and discovers that the anticipated loneliness never fully materializes, replaced instead by a steady calm and the freedom to direct his attention wherever he chooses without negotiation or compromise. As this experiment extends, the man starts reclaiming aspects of himself that he had quietly set aside to maintain harmony in past relationships, interests that were deemed too time consuming or immature, opinions that sparked unnecessary debates, even simple preferences in daily routines like meal times or entertainment choices that previously required consensus. He cooks exactly what he wants without considering allergies or picky tastes beyond his own. Watches films or series that captivate him without pausing for someone else's engagement level. Plans weekends around hikes or projects that energize him rather than balancing conflicting social calendars. These small acts of self determination accumulate into a powerful sense of agency, reminding him that living for one can be remarkably efficient and satisfying when the alternative has historically involved constant emotional labor and second guessing. Friends notice the change, commenting on how much more relaxed and present he seems, how his humor returns sharper and less guarded, how he speaks with newfound conviction rather than hedging to avoid conflict. This internal rebuilding extends into deeper identity work, where men confront the lingering effects of years spent absorbing messages that frame their natural traits as problematic or in need of constant management. Many engage in therapy or self reflection, not to become better partners for hypothetical future women, but to release residual guilt or shame implanted by cultural conditioning that positioned masculinity itself as suspect. They unpack the ways they were taught to view assertiveness as aggression, protectiveness as control, stoicism as emotional unavailability, and begin reclaiming these qualities as neutral or even positive when applied with self awareness and restraint. The process involves forgiving themselves for past accommodations made in good faith, recognizing that bending to unreasonable expectations does not reflect weakness, but rather a sincere attempt at connection in an unbalanced environment. Emerging from this introspection, men often report feeling whole for the first time, no longer defining success by external validation through romantic achievement, but by internal metrics of peace, purpose, and progress. Rhetorically, one must pause to consider what society loses when millions of capable, resourceful men redirect their considerable energy away from family formation and toward personal mastery and male centered communities. Historically, male drive has fueled innovation, infrastructure, exploration, and cultural advancement, all often with the underlying motivation of providing for or impressing potential mates and offspring. Yet, in the current landscape, that drive finds new outlets untethered from those traditional incentives. Men invest in businesses, physical transformation, skill acquisition, travel, and creative endeavors with an intensity that surprises even themselves, producing side effects like higher rates of entrepreneurship among single men, increased participation in extreme sports or challenging physical pursuits, and the flourishing of male only spaces, both online and offline, where knowledge and support flow freely without fear of misinterpretation. These developments suggest that male potential does not evaporate with disengagement from dating, but rather concentrates in directions that benefit the individual first and society secondarily through indirect contributions. Meanwhile, women observing these changes from afar often grapple with a mix of emotions ranging from resentment to bewilderment to reluctant admiration, struggling to reconcile the reality of self sufficient men with earlier narratives that portrayed men as inherently needy or incomplete without female influence. Some respond by doubling down on independence messaging, celebrating female solidarity and achievement, while quietly acknowledging gaps in emotional support or practical assistance that male partners once filled seamlessly. Others express concern about long term demographic implications, but worrying about declining population rates or the challenges of raising children in systems increasingly strained by absent male involvement, yet find that appeals rooted in duty or societal obligation fall flat on men who have already calculated personal cost benefit ratios and chosen differently. The disconnect grows as women seek explanations in male immaturity or fear of commitment rather than examining the push factors that made withdrawal the rational choice for so many. Storytelling from women who have attempted to re engage high value men after periods of independence reveals consistent patterns of rejection, delivered politely but firmly, with men citing contentment with their current lives as the primary reason rather than lingering anger. These men explain that they have built routines and mindsets optimized for one, that introducing another person would require disruption they no longer view as worthwhile, that the peace they have cultivated feels too precious to risk on dynamics that historically proved unstable. Women hearing these responses sometimes interpret them as bluff or temporary phases, underestimating the depth of conviction forged through years of trial and error, not recognizing that the decision represents a permanent recalibration rather than a negotiable stance. Attempts to entice with promises of different behavior or appeals to biological urges rarely sway men who have transcended those impulses through discipline and alternative fulfillment sources. Expanding on the international dimension, men who do pursue relationships increasingly do so with deliberate selection of partners raised under cultural frameworks that still value traditional complementarity, traveling to or relocating in regions where women often express appreciation for male provision and protection without framing them as oppressive. These men describe encounters refreshingly free of the adversarial undertones prevalent in Western dating. where conversations flow naturally toward shared goals like family and home rather than debates about equality metrics or past grievances. Success stories circulate in dedicated communities, detailing marriages built on mutual respect and clear roles, with children raised in stable environments that contrast sharply with the turbulence many experienced growing up in fractured Western households. This migration of mate seeking behavior underscores the depth of disillusionment with domestic options, as men vote with their passports and resources for systems that align better with their vision of sustainable partnership. Back in Western societies, the absence of these men from the dating pool creates cascading effects that reshape social ecosystems in subtle but profound ways. Venues traditionally designed for mixed courtship evolve to cater more heavily to female patrons or same gender groups, with entertainment shifting accordingly toward themes that resonate with those demographics. Professional matchmaking services report surging demand from women alongside dwindling supply of eligible men willing to participate, forcing innovation in screening processes that increasingly emphasize female accountability and relationship readiness to attract male clients. Educational institutions note changing enrollment patterns as young men prioritize trades, technology, or entrepreneurship over degrees historically pursued partly for mate attraction, reflecting shifted life strategies where financial independence trumps social signaling through credentials. Rhetorically, society must confront whether policies and cultural messaging that contributed to male disengagement can be adjusted meaningfully without acknowledging root causes that extend beyond individual behavior into systemic incentives. Calls for men to return often focus on what women or children need, while offering little concrete assurance that the underlying dynamics have shifted sufficiently to make re engagement low risk. Men, having learned to trust their own assessments over external promises, remain skeptical of reform efforts that appear performative rather than substantive, preferring the proven reliability of their independent lives. This skepticism solidifies as younger cohorts enter adulthood already immersed in cautionary tales from elders, adopting protective strategies earlier and further entrenching the trend. Consider the economic implications as men optimize spending for personal satisfaction rather than couple or family formation, redirecting disposable income toward experiences, investments, health optimization, and luxury goods tailored to individual tastes. Industries serving traditional family units experience contraction, while sectors catering to single male consumers expand rapidly, from adventure travel to high end home gyms to premium content creation tools. Real estate markets shift as men favor smaller, high amenity properties optimized for solo or small group living over larger homes designed for child rearing. Financial advisors report clients increasingly structuring wealth preservation around longevity and personal legacy rather than intergenerational transfer through offspring, with charitable giving or mentorship programs filling the role previously occupied by direct parenthood. This reallocation of male resources reflects a broader philosophical pivot toward viewing life as an individual journey worthy of optimization on its own terms, rather than a prerequisite phase for family building. Men articulate visions of legacy through creation, influence, or community contribution outside biological reproduction, finding meaning in building businesses that employ others, mastering skills that inspire peers, or supporting causes aligned with personal values. The fulfillment derived from these paths rivals or exceeds what many experienced in traditional relationships, validating the choice retrospectively and strengthening resolve against societal pressure to conform. As we deepen this analysis, recognize that the peace men discover in solitude often extends into enhanced relationships with family, friends, and colleagues, free from the spillover stress that strained those connections during periods of romantic turmoil. Fathers who walked away from toxic marriages report becoming more present and patient with children during custody time, no longer distracted by ongoing conflict with ex partners. Friendships deepen as men invest consistent time and emotional availability previously diverted toward dating maintenance. Professional performance improves with reduced mental load from relationship management, leading to promotions, innovations, or successful ventures that further reinforce financial independence. Women navigating parallel paths of independence sometimes reach similar conclusions about prioritizing self containment, though cultural expectations around family often create stronger internal conflict. Those who embrace permanent singleness report comparable benefits in peace and autonomy, though demographic data suggests this outcome remains less common among women due to differing biological and social pressures. The asymmetry highlights fundamental differences in how men and women experience the costs and benefits of relational withdrawal, with men generally finding adaptation smoother, given lower societal expectation for parenthood as identity cornerstone. Think about a teenage boy in 2026 navigating high school and early adulthood while absorbing the world around him through social media, family dynamics, and peer conversations, witnessing firsthand the outcomes of decisions made by the men who came before him. He sees uncles or older cousins thriving in their 30s and 40s without wives or children, traveling freely, building impressive physiques, launching businesses, or simply enjoying hobbies with an intensity that married men with families rarely match due to time and resource constraints. He hears stories from his father or older brother about the stresses of past relationships, the financial devastation of divorce, or the emotional toll of constant accommodation. And he processes these anecdotes not as isolated failures, but as representative warnings about potential pitfalls in pursuing the old script. This young man grows up in a cultural environment where messages about relationships are far more cautious and nuanced than those his father encountered, where influencers, podcasters, and online communities openly discuss the risks and rewards of commitment in the current climate, emphasizing financial independence, emotional self reliance, and clear boundary setting as foundational before even considering partnership. Schools and media still promote ideas of equality and respect, but the counter narrative of male self preservation has gained enough traction that it reaches him through alerts as algorithms and word of mouth, presenting solitude or selective engagement as viable and even admirable options rather than signs of deficiency. He learns early to prioritize education or trade skills that lead to immediate earning potential, to cultivate male friendships as primary support networks, and to view romantic pursuit as an optional enhancement rather than a core life milestone, fundamentally altering his approach to adolescence and young adulthood compared to previous cohorts. Rhetorically, one might ask how society adapts when the primary motivator that historically drove young men to excel, take risks, and build wealth, namely the desire to attract and provide for a family, diminishes in strength across a significant portion of the population. Innovation and economic growth have long benefited from male ambition channeled toward mate attraction and offspring security. Yet, as that channel weakens, ambition does not disappear, but redirects toward immediate personal gratification and legacy through non traditional means. Young men invest in cryptocurrency, real estate, content creation, or physical optimization with a fervor that reflects the same evolutionary drive, now untethered from reproductive imperatives and focused instead on self actualization and peer respect within male circles. The result is a generation potentially more entrepreneurial, physically capable, and financially literate than recent predecessors, but less inclined to translate those gains into traditional family structures, creating a paradox where individual male success rises while collective societal metrics like birth rates and household formation decline. Women coming of age alongside these young men encounter a dating landscape markedly different from what their mothers or older sisters experienced, one where high caliber men are less abundant in the pursuit pool and more selective when they do participate, often applying rigorous standards shaped by observation of past generational outcomes. Many women respond by accelerating their own education and career trajectories, recognizing that relying on male provision carries greater uncertainty than before, while others express frustration at perceived male withdrawal, interpreting it through lenses of immaturity or entitlement without always connecting it to the push factors that prompted the shift. Social platforms amplify these tensions with debates raging over responsibility and expectations. Yet the underlying demographic realities continue evolving independently of the discourse as men quietly live out their preferences rather than arguing about them. Storytelling from the perspective of these younger men reveals a confidence and clarity uncommon in prior generations at similar ages, a sense of owning their life direction without needing external romantic validation to feel complete. They speak of setting firm standards early, of walking away from situations that feel unbalanced without hesitation, of viewing marriage as a high risk venture requiring extraordinary compatibility rather than a default progression. Many articulate plans to remain uncommitted until well into their 30s or beyond, if ever, prioritizing wealth accumulation, health optimization, and experiential richness during their prime years, with family consideration deferred indefinitely or relocated to international options should the desire arise later. This mindset spreads virally through male networks, reinforced by visible success stories of older men who embody the benefits of delayed or foregone commitment. Expanding on the international contrast, the appeal of foreign partners for Western men stems not merely from physical attributes, but from observed differences in socialization that produce women who often express gratitude for male leadership, provision, and protection, without framing those traits as toxic or outdated. Men who marry abroad describe home environments characterized by harmony and mutual appreciation, where disagreements resolve through compromise rather than emotional escalation, where femininity is celebrated rather than suspect, and where family goals align naturally rather than requiring constant negotiation. These unions challenge narratives of universal gender progress by demonstrating that cultural frameworks valuing complementary roles can yield high satisfaction for both parties, prompting rhetorical questions about whether Western shifts truly represent advancement for all, or primarily for one side at the expense of relational stability. Back domestically, attempts to revive male engagement through policy or cultural campaigns often falter by focusing on what men should do for women in society rather than addressing what drove disengagement in the first place. Initiatives promoting fatherhood or marriage incentives meet skepticism when men perceive underlying dynamics unchanged, viewing participation as assuming outsized risk for uncertain reward. Financial literacy among men has grown sufficiently that many calculate divorce statistics, asset division realities, and false accusation potentials into their decision matrices, concluding that the probable outcomes do not justify entry except under exceptional circumstances. This rational approach, once dismissed as cynical, now appears pragmatic to increasing numbers who prioritize long term security over short term societal approval. Consider how media representation evolves in response to these realities, with entertainment gradually reflecting the new norms through characters embodying self sufficient masculinity, content creators gaining followings by chronicling independent lifestyles, and traditional romantic tropes losing some of their unquestioned dominance. Films and series begin incorporating storylines where male protagonists thrive without romantic resolution, challenging the old formula that happiness requires pairing, while documentaries and talk shows explore the phenomenon with varying degrees of depth and bias. Public discourse shifts from pathologizing male singleness to examining its causes and consequences, with some voices acknowledging that sustained one sided pressure eventually produces withdrawal as the natural counterbalance. Rhetorically, society faces ongoing tension between celebrating individual choice and grappling with aggregate outcomes of those choices when aligned across millions. Declining birth rates trigger concern in policy circles, yet solutions focused on encouraging male re engagement without fundamental incentive realignment gain little traction. Men observe these discussions with detached interest, having already secured personal equilibria that external alarms do not disrupt. Their peace rooted in daily lived experience rather than theoretical obligations. The resilience of this stance grows with time as each cohort reinforces the previous through example and mentorship, creating a self sustaining cultural subsystem parallel to mainstream expectations. As economic conditions fluctuate, men who embraced independence early demonstrate greater adaptability, with lower fixed obligations, allowing flexibility during downturns and agility in capitalizing on opportunities. Single households require fewer resources to maintain comfortably. Investment portfolios grow unencumbered by family related expenses, and career risks become more palatable without dependence relying on steady income. This financial insulation further solidifies the lifestyle, making reversion to higher risk relational models even less appealing when stability has been achieved through simpler means. Women navigating similar economic waters sometimes achieve comparable independence, though differing spending patterns and safety considerations often lead to different outcomes in solitude tolerance. Delving into the emotional landscape, men in this space frequently describe a profound sense of liberation from performance anxiety that colored past interactions, no longer needing to prove worth through provision or emotional acrobatics, free to exist authentically without constant evaluation. Vulnerability becomes selective rather than mandatory, shared with trusted male friends or family rather than risked in romantic contexts where it was historically weaponized. Emotional intelligence develops through self work rather than partner feedback, leading to greater overall regulation and resilience. The absence of relational drama translates into consistent mood stability, improved sleep, and reduced stress markers that compound into long term health advantages. Young women observing these emotionally grounded men from a distance sometimes express attraction mixed with frustration, drawn to the calm confidence, yet challenged in accessing it due to the very boundaries that enable it. Attempts to penetrate those boundaries without offering clear reciprocal value often fail, reinforcing male selectivity and creating feedback loops that further entrench positions on both sides. The dynamic evolves into a stalemate where neither side fully concedes ground, with men content in their fortified peace and women divided between adaptation and resistance. Ultimately, the depth of this transformation reveals itself in quiet daily moments. A man preparing a meal solely to his taste, training in the gym with undivided focus, reading late into the night without interruption, traveling on impulse without coordination, building wealth methodically without diversion. These moments, multiplied across millions of lives, constitute the true revolution, not loud protest, but lived preference expressed consistently over years. The permanence lies in the compounding satisfaction of this existence, where each positive reinforcement makes return to previous turbulence increasingly unimaginable. Visualize a community where schools once counted on involved fathers for mentoring programs, coaching youth sports, or attending parent teacher conferences in balanced numbers. Now finding those roles increasingly filled by women or professionals, while male involvement shifts toward occasional financial support or complete absence in cases of limited custody. Teachers report classrooms with boys who exhibit strong independence but less deference to authority, shaped by home environments where male figures, if present, model self reliance over relational compromise, or by online influences emphasizing personal sovereignty from early ages. Educational approaches evolve to accommodate these shifts, with greater focus on individualized learning paths and practical skills over group dynamics that assume traditional family backdrops, reflecting an adaptation to the new demographic realities rather than resistance to them. Rhetorically, one could inquire whether the infrastructure of modern society, built on assumptions of paired adults raising the next generation with shared responsibilities, can sustain itself indefinitely when pairing rates decline and male investment in communal child rearing diminishes proportionally. Governments express concern through policy papers and demographic projections highlighting aging populations and shrinking workforces, yet proposed solutions often center on incentivizing women to have more children or importing labor rather than directly addressing male disincentives to family formation. Men observe these discussions with the same detached perspective they apply to calls for relational return, recognizing that external pressures rarely override personal calculations of risk and reward forged through direct experience and observation. The resilience of individual choice in this context demonstrates the limits of top down encouragement when bottom up preferences have solidified around alternative fulfillment models. Storytelling from educators and community leaders reveals mixed outcomes, with some programs thriving through female led innovation and others struggling to engage boys who view institutional expectations through lenses of skepticism learned from older male role models. Sports leagues adapt by lowering participation barriers or merging age groups to maintain viability, while mentorship initiatives pivot toward professional pairings or digital platforms that connect young men with successful independence, sharing knowledge without requiring ongoing relational commitment. These adjustments illustrate societal flexibility, yet they also underscore the quiet cost of reduced organic male involvement that once flowed naturally from family oriented motivations. Women stepping into these gaps often express fulfillment in leadership, but occasional exhaustion from carrying disproportionate loads, echoing broader patterns of imbalance that initially contributed to male withdrawal. Expanding into workplace dynamics, companies notice evolving patterns in male employee priorities, with greater emphasis on work life separation, remote options, and compensation structures that reward individual performance over long term loyalty tied to family benefits. Men negotiate for higher base salaries rather than comprehensive family health plans, prioritize roles with clear advancement metrics over those requiring extensive networking that might spill into personal time, and show less tolerance for corporate cultures demanding emotional availability or team building exercises perceived as intrusive. Human resources departments adapt by offering flexible packages catering to single lifestyles, such as enhanced gym memberships, travel allowances, or professional development stipends. Recognizing that retention strategies must align with actual employee needs rather than outdated assumptions about life stages. Productivity in many sectors remains strong or improves as focused individuals without familial distractions channel energy into career excellence, challenging narratives that male disengagement necessarily harms economic output. Consider the evolution of male social networks in this new paradigm, where friendships deepen and expand to fill roles traditionally occupied by spouses, creating robust support systems built on shared interests and mutual reliability rather than romantic obligation. Groups organize regular adventures, skill sharing workshops, investment clubs, or philosophical discussions, fostering bonds that provide emotional depth, practical assistance, and accountability without the volatility associated with opposite gender intimacy. These networks extend digitally across continents, allowing men to access advice, encouragement, and camaraderie from thousands experiencing similar paths, reinforcing convictions through collective wisdom and success validation. The strength of these connections rivals or surpasses marital support for many, offering the benefits of partnership without the risks and demonstrating that human needs for belonging can be met through diverse configurations beyond the couple model. Women observing these thriving male ecosystems sometimes express envy or curiosity, wondering why similar depth appears harder to cultivate in female circles strained by competition or differing priorities, though many women do build equally strong networks focused on career support, wellness, or creative expression. The difference often lies in the absence of romantic undercurrents that complicate same gender female friendships less frequently than mixed interactions, allowing male bonds to develop with straightforward clarity. This observation prompts rhetorical reflection on whether cultural messaging that discouraged strong male homosocial bonds in favor of prioritizing romantic relationships contributed to isolation that men now rectify through deliberate community building outside those constraints. Delving into health outcomes, data increasingly suggests advantages for men embracing long term singleness when practiced with intention and discipline, with lower rates of stress related conditions, better adherence to fitness regimens, and more consistent sleep patterns compared to counterparts in turbulent relationships. Medical professionals note patients who present calmer dispositions, proactive approaches to preventive care, and greater compliance with lifestyle recommendations. Once relational drama no longer disrupts routines, mental health improves through self directed practices like meditation, journaling, or therapy focused on personal growth rather than couple resolution, leading to reduced anxiety and depression markers over time. These benefits compound as habits solidify, creating virtuous cycles where physical vitality supports emotional stability and vice versa, further entrenching the appeal of independent living. Rhetorically, society must grapple with the irony that policies and cultural shifts intended to liberate individuals from restrictive gender roles may have inadvertently liberated one gender more effectively than the other in terms of achieving sustainable peace and health. Men, once positioned as beneficiaries of patriarchal structures, now find greater equilibrium outside those structures than within strained modern interpretations. While women navigate lingering expectations around family and emotional labor that independence messaging has not fully erased. This asymmetry highlights the complexity of gender dynamics, where intended equality sometimes yields unequal practical outcomes based on differing biological realities and social pressures. Young men entering this landscape inherit tools and mindsets that position them for success on revised terms. Learning financial literacy early through accessible online resources, cultivating physical discipline through widely available training protocols, and building resilience through exposure to diverse philosophical perspectives on meaning and purpose. They approach potential relationships, if considered at all, with contractual clarity influenced by legal awareness and prenuptial normalization, viewing commitment as a deliberate business-like decision rather than emotional inevitability. This pragmatic stance reduces heartbreak incidents and empowers quicker recovery when incompatibilities emerge, preserving emotional resources for productive pursuits rather than prolonged recovery periods. Women adapting to these realities increasingly prioritize their own financial independence, health optimization, and network building, recognizing that male reliability as default cannot be assumed in the emerging paradigm. Successful women in this space often mirror male strategies, focusing on career mastery, personal development, and selective social engagement, while accepting that family formation may require extraordinary alignment or alternative paths like single motherhood by choice. The convergence of approaches suggests potential for new forms of interaction based on mutual self sufficiency rather than interdependent need, though widespread adoption remains gradual as cultural inertia persists. As decades pass within this transformed framework, cultural artifacts begin reflecting the new normal through literature, film, and art that explore independence as heroic rather than tragic, portraying characters who find profundity in solo journeys or chosen communities without requiring romantic resolution for narrative satisfaction. Classic tales of courtship and family triumph retain historical interest but lose prescriptive power, replaced by stories celebrating individual mastery, fraternal loyalty, and self defined legacy. This artistic shift reinforces generational transmission, normalizing diverse life paths and reducing pressure on outliers to conform to diminishing traditional models. Let us bring this extensive exploration toward its conclusion by reflecting on the enduring nature of the choices men have made and how these decisions have crystallized into a new paradigm that shows no signs of reversal. Because once a critical mass of men experiences the tangible benefits of peace through independence, the momentum becomes self sustaining and resistant to external forces attempting to pull them back into previous patterns. Picture a man in his 50s now, looking back on a life that diverged from the expected trajectory 2 decades ago when he made the deliberate choice to step away from the dating and marriage landscape after repeated experiences that left him questioning the value of continued participation. He remembers the exhaustion of constantly adjusting to shifting expectations, the financial risks that loomed over every serious relationship, the emotional drain of navigating conflicts where resolution seemed perpetually out of reach, and he contrasts those memories with the steady calm that has defined his days ever since he closed that chapter. His home is arranged exactly to his preferences. His schedule bends to his priorities alone. His finances grow without diversion into joint accounts or family obligations. And his circle of friends provides rich companionship built on shared pursuits rather than obligatory ties. This man mentors younger men informally, not through lectures, but through the quiet example of his contentment, hosting gatherings where conversations flow freely about investments, travel plans, fitness goals, or philosophical ideas without the undercurrent of relational complaints that once dominated such talks. Younger attendees observe his vitality, his lack of regret, his ability to pursue passions deferred in youth because he no longer carries the weight of partnership maintenance, and they internalize the lesson that fulfillment does not require following the old blueprint. These interactions ripple outward, strengthening the cultural transmission of independence as a viable and often superior path, creating layers of reinforcement across age groups that make societal reversal increasingly improbable. Women who encounter these men socially or professionally often note the contrast with peers still entangled in relational turbulence, sensing the unshakable calm that comes from resolved boundaries, yet finding access limited by the very self sufficiency that produces it. Rhetorically, one must consider whether any society can meaningfully restore participation from a group that has discovered higher individual returns outside the system. without fundamentally restructuring the incentives that drove withdrawal in the first place. Historical attempts to re engage disaffected populations through appeals to duty, tradition, or future generations rarely succeed when personal experience contradicts the messaging. And in this case, the lived evidence overwhelmingly supports continued separation. Men share detailed accounts of improved health markers, expanded networks, financial growth, and daily joy that stand in stark contrast to memories of relational strain, creating a body of anecdotal evidence too consistent to dismiss as outlier exceptions. These stories circulate widely in dedicated spaces, providing blueprints for younger men to follow and validation for veterans who chose early, solidifying a parallel culture that operates alongside mainstream society without direct confrontation. Expanding on long term health and longevity prospects, men maintaining disciplined, independent lifestyles often project trajectories of sustained vitality into later years, free from the chronic stress that relationship conflict and family responsibilities can impose when unbalanced. Regular exercise becomes non negotiable without competing demands. Nutrition optimizes for personal performance rather than family preferences. Sleep schedules remain consistent without disruption from partner needs or child related interruptions. Medical checkups occur proactively rather than reactively after prolonged neglect during their turbulent periods, catching potential issues early and extending quality years. Mental resilience grows through practiced solitude and selective vulnerability, reducing susceptibility to depression or anxiety that plagued earlier relational phases. This holistic approach to self care yields compounding benefits that further distance men from any temptation to re enter dynamics that historically undermined well being. Women navigating extended singleness by choice or circumstance sometimes achieve similar outcomes through parallel discipline, though societal pressures and biological considerations often create different emotional landscapes that make pure solitude less universally embraced. Many women excel professionally and socially while maintaining hope for eventual partnership, viewing independence as a strong position from which to select rather than a permanent destination. This difference underscores fundamental asymmetries in how men and women process relational costs and benefits, with men more readily accepting permanent disengagement when the scales tip toward peace. The resulting divergence in life paths contributes to the widening experiential gap that makes mutual understanding across gender lines increasingly challenging in Western contexts. Storytelling from men who briefly reconsidered re engagement after years away reveals consistent patterns of rapid reaffirmation of their original choice, often triggered by brief dating attempts that quickly resurfaced familiar frustrations despite initial optimism. These men describe encountering the same dynamics they fled years earlier, updated only superficially by awareness rhetoric, but unchanged at core in terms of emotional escalation, expectation imbalance, or risk exposure. The contrast with their established peace proves too stark, leading to swift withdrawal and deeper commitment to independence, often shared as cautionary updates within communities to reinforce collective resolve. Such experiences serve as living proof that time alone does not heal underlying incompatibilities, that absence of change in foundational dynamics renders return futile, regardless of personal growth achieved individually. Consider the philosophical evolution underway as men redefine purpose and legacy outside biological reproduction and traditional provision roles, embracing frameworks where meaning derives from creation, contribution, and self mastery rather than familial continuation alone. Some channel resources into philanthropic causes aligned with personal values, others mentor informally or through structured programs. Many build businesses that employ and uplift others, and all cultivate inner richness through ongoing learning and experience. This redefinition liberates men from existential pressure to procreate as proof of success, allowing focus on immediate impact and personal transcendence that feels more controllable and rewarding in the present. The shift echoes ancient Stoic principles adapted to modern circumstances, prioritizing internal sovereignty over external validation through relationship status. Rhetorically, society confronts the challenge of integrating this philosophical pivot without alienating the contributors who sustain it through taxes, innovation, and labor, while opting out of reproductive investment. Policy discussions increasingly acknowledge declining birth rates as structural issues requiring immigration or technological solutions, rather than expecting male behavioral reversal, recognizing the depth of conviction driving individual choices. Economic models adjust projections to account for higher single household consumption and lower family related spending, with industries adapting products and services accordingly. The gradual acceptance of demographic reality over moral appeals marks a pragmatic turning point where adaptation replaces denial. As cultural narratives evolve, entertainment media begins portraying independent men with nuance rather than caricature, exploring their inner lives, challenges, and triumphs without defaulting to redemption through relationship arcs. Literature features protagonists who navigate meaningful existence through friendship, purpose, and self discovery, challenging readers to question inherited assumptions about life completion. These representations normalize diverse outcomes, reducing stigma around chosen singleness and providing younger audiences with broader templates for envisioning their futures. The cumulative effect strengthens cultural pluralism, where traditional paths coexist alongside emerging alternatives without one claiming universal superiority. Delving into financial independence as the bedrock enabling sustained withdrawal, men who prioritize wealth building early now enjoy freedom that insulates against economic fluctuations and eliminates desperation as a relationship motivator. Investment portfolios mature, real estate holdings appreciate, passive income streams develop, all structured around individual needs rather than family expansion. This financial fortress removes any lingering practical incentive to partner for security, allowing decisions to remain rooted purely in desire rather than necessity. Younger men observing these outcomes accelerate their own financial education, recognizing money as the ultimate boundary protector and peace guarantor in an unpredictable world. Women achieving comparable financial independence increasingly mirror this mindset, though differing spending priorities and safety considerations often lead to different lifestyle expressions. The convergence at high autonomy levels suggests potential future interactions based on genuine compatibility rather than need, potentially yielding healthier dynamics if trust can be rebuilt selectively. However, widespread adoption remains limited by lingering cultural expectations and biological timelines that create asymmetry and urgency around partnership decisions. Ultimately, the permanence of this shift manifests most clearly in the absence of widespread regret among men who walked away, with surveys and community discussions consistently revealing high satisfaction rates years or decades into independence. Men articulate gratitude for the clarity that pain provided, viewing past relational investments as tuition paid for invaluable wisdom about self respect and boundaries. The peace achieved feels sacred rather than circumstantial, protected fiercely against any encroachment that threatens its integrity. Society continues adapting around this reality, finding new equilibria that accommodate human choice, even when aggregate outcomes challenge previous assumptions. As we conclude this deep dive, recognize that men walking away represents not an ending but a beginning of individual sovereignty exercised at scale, a collective affirmation that personal well being supersedes obligatory participation in systems that no longer serve equitably. The damage done to trust and mutual incentive proves too profound for quick repair, leaving separation as the rational long term strategy for millions. Winter has settled in the relational landscape, yet men thrive in the clarity it brings, building lives of purpose and contentment on their own terms. What do you think about all this? Do you agree with the observations shared here? Or do you see things differently? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts because I read them all. And like the video if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.